Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. We're out here outside the garden today on this kind of cool day. I thought that today, especially since garden season is over, it's time to start, soon it will be time to start looking forward to next garden season. And now that 2024 is kind of winding down, I thought it would be a good time to look back on some of the new vegetable varieties that I tried out in the garden this year and report back on them. You know, a lot of times at the beginning of the season, I share with you guys the seeds that I'm growing. I share with you all the different varieties that I'm trying out for the first time. And then, you know, as the season goes on, I do my best to update you on how those different varieties are doing. But, you know, I find it useful just at the end of the season to take a look back at those different varieties. And that way, everything that I said, I'll let you know how it goes as the season goes on. I can kind of update you about those varieties here. So I did recently do a video focusing on all the tomatoes that I grew this year, basically reviewing all the different varieties, and a similar one for peppers. So I'm going to link both of those in the video description. Those are focusing on all of the tomatoes and all the peppers I grew this year, not necessarily just the new ones. So while I will touch on tomatoes and peppers a little bit in this video, I go into a lot more depth on those two types of vegetables in those other videos. Here in this video, as I said, I'll touch on those briefly, and we'll talk about some other different varieties that I tried out in the garden for the first time this year. So, looking back on the 2024 garden season, one of the new varieties that I tried this year for the very first time was a sprouting broccoli. Sometimes you'll see it called a broccolini, called aspabroc. Now, this was my first time. I've grown heading broccoli many times. This was my first time trying a sprouting broccoli, and we did really enjoy it. I found that it was really delicious, really tender. We liked picking those small heads of broccoli and sauteing them for a really simple side dish with dinner. It was really delicious that way. So we definitely enjoyed the flavor. I will say I wasn't sure about the yield because I only had a handful of plants, and I found that at a time, whenever I harvested, I only got a small amount at a time, enough for a small side dish with dinner. And I wasn't sure if it would be worth the space that I allocated to those plants. As the season went on, I was hoping to determine that a little bit more based on how many harvests I was able to get. Unfortunately, some of my sprouting broccoli did get eaten by pests. So I'm not sure actually how they would have done, how well they would have yielded had they got to yield for the entire season. So I would say we did really enjoy them, and I think those are definitely worth another try. So I am definitely going to be growing sprouting broccoli next year. I'm not sure if it's going to be the same variety or not. I will definitely I'll keep you updated about that. But one thing I did notice is I was out in my garden recently just looking around to see what had survived our frost. And I actually saw that the sprouting broccoli, along with some kale that had been eaten, were starting to make a little bit of a comeback. I thought that they were pretty much gone. So I'm not sure how much of a harvest we'll get at this point in the season. It is getting pretty cold. The daylight hours are pretty short. But I will, again, keep you updated about that probably next season when I start seeds, or when I share with you the seeds that I'm planning to grow in the 2025 garden. I will let you know how the sprouting broccoli ended up doing with that regard. Next, I want to mention a variety of bush beans. Now, I love bush beans, and I grow many varieties of bush beans every year. This year, I tried out a variety called Jade, which I did end up really enjoying. Now, I think I would have been able to better review the performance of this variety if I started it a little bit earlier in the season, because I did have most of my bush beans already started and established. I didn't have quite enough, so I decided to order some Jade bush beans and add those to the big array of bush beans that I had growing. That being said, we did really enjoy them. I found that they were very tender. They had a really good flavor. I enjoyed that they're a nice deep green color, so they're a little bit darker than a lot of other green bush beans that you'll find. So we did really enjoy them. That was one that I would love to try again towards the beginning of the season, plant them earlier in the season, and hopefully be able to do a more comprehensive review. But, you know, from what we got from them, I did really enjoy those. So I would recommend those, and I will definitely be growing those again next year. Next, I do want to mention a couple pepper varieties that we tried this year for the very first time. While I have tried the red and the yellow Corno de Toro a few times in the past and really enjoyed them, this year was the first year that we tried the orange Corno de Toro and the chocolate Corno de Toro varieties. You know, I love to have a big variety of vegetables. I like to have a big variety of colors, and you know, the slight difference in flavor profiles between the different color of peppers I think is really enjoyable too. So I was able to find seeds for the orange variety and the chocolate variety. Both of those are a little less common than the classic red and yellow. So we grew both of those this year. We really enjoyed both of them. I found that they both yielded really well. So basically my goal in growing so many sweet pepper varieties is to try to find alternatives to bell peppers. You know, I love bell peppers. I think they have a wonderful flavor and I really enjoy them. The trouble with bell peppers is that I have found in my garden they tend to not yield as well. There are lots of other sweet pepper varieties that yield really well. So I've been trying out some different ones to see what I can use to replace bell peppers in the garden. And I really enjoyed both the orange and the chocolate Corno de Toro varieties. They were really beautiful. They're both more, you know, you see orange peppers pretty regularly, but they're a little less common than the classic red and yellow. And the chocolate is really unusual to see. So I really enjoyed the variety that growing both of those added to the garden. The other pepper variety that I'm going to mention in this video, we tried this year for the first time, was the red Marconi pepper. I really enjoyed this pepper and I actually found it really similar to a bell pepper. Most pictures that I've seen of the red Marconi showed it more elongated, more similar to the Corno de Toro. But when I grew them, it was shaped a lot more similarly to red bell peppers, but I found that the plant yielded significantly more than red bell peppers that I've grown in the past. So we really enjoyed those. I am planning on growing those again next year. So I will continue to update you on that, but I definitely found those to be worth growing. Another variety that I tried, I'm going to say it was for the first time this year. I did actually try it last year, but I was not successful with it last year. I think part of that was because I started it a little bit late in the season. This year we were successful, and that is the honey nut squash. Now, the honey nut is a variety that's very similar to butternut. It's supposed to be a personal serving or personal sized butternut squash. But some of our honey nut squashes actually got fairly large. I will say that I am not the biggest fan of winter squash, the flavor, but I really did want to add some winter squash basically to our garden because it stores so well. And there's so many ways that you can use it. Even if you're not a huge winter squash person like I'm not, you can roast it and use it in baking recipes similarly to pumpkin. So I plan on over the winter using a lot of my honey nut squash that way. I may even attempt trying to make like French fries, you know, the way you would make sweet potato fries out of it. We'll see how that goes. I'm not sure how that's going to go yet. If you've tried anything like that, let me know. It would basically be roasting the squash in strips shaped like French fries and just seasoning them. So I think that that might be a fun way to try it too. So again, if you've tried butternut squash or honey nut squash or anything like that way, let me know. So we got a really good yield out of these. I planted them over in my side yard garden and we planted them along our trellises. So they grew up the trellis arches and we actually got more squash than I was thinking that we were going to get. So I was pleasantly surprised by the yield. So I'm really looking forward to enjoying some of those over the coming winter months. Now, another squash variety that we tried this year for the first time is actually a pumpkin. I'm going to put the spelling on the screen for you because I'm probably not going to pronounce it correctly. This is the Musquee de Provence pumpkin. Now this pumpkin I decided to kind of try this on a whim. It was a little bit more of a fun experiment. And this pumpkin plant got huge. It tried to take over my entire garden and it came pretty close. The pumpkin plant actually climbed that trellis behind me. That trellis was being used for cucumbers last year, but the pumpkin sent out some runners that climbed the trellis and they grew a pumpkin at the top of the trellis. And it wedged itself in between the spokes of the trellis. So harvesting that was a little bit interesting. We actually came out here right before the first frost. My husband and I harvested it with a saw and a chisel, and we got the pumpkin out of the trellis, but it was a little bit of a process. So anyway, once I harvested that pumpkin, obviously I had to do something with it immediately because we had to cut it in half to harvest it. So I gave a chunk of it to the chickens, the part that had gotten a little bit dirty during the harvesting process. The chickens got to enjoy that. I brought the rest of the pumpkin inside and roasted it up and turned it into a pumpkin puree. And right now that's in the freezer. We're planning to use that over the winter on some baked goods. Have some pumpkin bread recipes planned. I'm going to just lots of baked goods involving pumpkin. And it was a beautiful, deep, rich orange color when we roasted it. I also have a really large size pumpkin from that plant too that I haven't had the ambition to tackle yet, but I will get into that at some point. Now, I will say a couple drawbacks of that pumpkin. One is the amount of space that it took up. I thought it produced really beautiful pumpkin fruits, so I think it would be really fun to grow again. It did take up a really large amount of space though. When you have a smaller garden like me, space is at a premium, and some of those rambling winter squash plants may not necessarily be the best fit. Now, when this pumpkin plant grew, how I grew it was I had a wall of tomatoes, and I had some ground space on the ground in front of the tomatoes, and I said, okay, a pumpkin can kind of ramble here and take up this ground space, which it did. But then it crawled up the trellis, as I said, it crawled over the other fence and into the side yard, which actually worked out really well because I didn't have anything growing over there. So it did work out really well. I will say the other drawback of this pumpkin is that I think it took a little bit longer of a growing season than is ideal for my area. As I said, I was able to harvest those 2 ripe pumpkins, but the pumpkin plant it set a few more pumpkins that it was not able to ripen before frost. So I think if you have a longer growing season, it might be a little bit better of a fit. Or what I may do, if I decide to grow it again next year, then I will probably start it a little bit earlier inside the house and transplant some plants out here. So we'll see. If I decide not to grow it, it won't be because of any fault of the pumpkin. It'll just be because I've decided to allocate that space to something else that takes up a little bit less space. So I haven't really decided what I'm going to do next year as far as that pumpkin, but it was definitely a fun experimental pumpkin to grow this year. Next, I do have a couple tomato varieties that I want to mention. Now, this year, I experimented a little bit with adding a couple hybrid tomato varieties to my garden. You know, in the past, and I will continue to garden primarily with heirlooms, especially when it comes to tomatoes, because I just love the variety. I love that rich flavor. I just love the history that's there, and I love the ability to save seeds and know what I'm getting. So there are a lot of great perks to growing heirloom tomatoes. That being said, often heirloom tomatoes are a little bit more susceptible to disease, where hybrids can be a little bit more resistant to disease. So what I found was that in my area, I would get a bountiful harvest of heirlooms, but they would peter out before the first frost came. And, you know, especially if you're in my area with a fairly short growing season, I'm here in Connecticut, and I like to make the absolute most of the gardening season that I have. So when my tomatoes kind of die out a few weeks before frost and I don't get the maximum harvest possible, that's something that I need to do something about. So that was my idea with adding a few heirlooms to the mix. You know, this past year I grew, again, mostly hybrids, but I tried out a few heirloom tomatoes hoping to I tried out a few hybrid tomatoes hoping to extend the harvest all the way up to frost. And it did work really well. I will say my favorite of the hybrid varieties that I tried this year was called the Lemon Boy Plus. This is a medium-sized yellow tomato. We really enjoyed it, had good flavor. I would say the flavor is not as good as a lot of my heirloom tomatoes, but I didn't really expect it to be. Basically, I wanted to extend the time that we were harvesting garden tomatoes and lower the amount of time that we had to get grocery store tomatoes. You know, a hybrid tomato that you grow in your own garden is still going to be far superior to any tomato you get at the grocery store. And that was the case with the Lemon Boy Plus. I found that the flavor was really good, definitely better than a grocery store tomato. Not quite as good as my heirlooms, but because it kind of filled that gap between when I would have stopped getting heirloom tomatoes and when the frost would have come, it was definitely worth it for that purpose. Now, it yielded much earlier than that as well. It was just that my goal was to fill that little bit of space between the end of heirloom season and the end of garden season, and it did that really well. So a couple other hybrid tomato varieties that I tried out this year were in the Chef's Choice line of tomatoes. So there is a hybrid tomato series that includes a variety of different colors. It's called the Chef's Choice series. This year I decided to try the Chef's Choice Orange and the Chef's Choice Black. I wasn't really planning to try either of those, but I ended up stopping at a local nursery that specializes in tomato varieties, and they had both of those for sale, so I figured I would pick one of each up and give them a try. I did really enjoy both varieties. Surprisingly, I actually enjoyed the orange more than the black. I found that the black actually yielded really prolifically. I thought that I was actually going to get a larger harvest from the black, but what I found out was that the orange did end up catching up with yield. And I found that the black fruits tended to rot a little bit more easily. So there were several that were not really harvestable or not really usable by the time they were ripe, where the orange fruits seemed to hold their condition a lot longer. So I did really enjoy both of those. It was a similar Similar situation to what I mentioned with the Lemon Boy Plus. The flavor was good, definitely far better than anything you would get at the grocery store, but I found that the flavor was not as good as some of my favorite tried and true heirloom varieties. So they did what I had hoped for them to do, which was to resist disease a little bit longer than my heirlooms and give me a little bit more of a harvest. I enjoyed both of those. I would say next year, I haven't fully fleshed out my garden plan next year, so I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do yet. I think that I most likely will not grow the black variety next year. I may end up trying, Chef's Choice also has a purple variety that seems fairly similar, so maybe I'll try that one instead. I'm not really sure if I will probably grow the orange variety, but I'm not 100% sure about that. I will definitely be growing the Lemon Boy Plus. So that will probably be my go-to hybrid variety, at least for now. Now, I did also try a new variety of tomato that I want to mention here, which was an heirloom tomato. This one, again, was not on my radar. I found this tomato variety at the same nursery where I found the Chef's Choice tomatoes and decided to give it a try, kind of spur of the moment. This variety is the Russian Big Roma. Now, I was also trying out a few paste tomato varieties this year, and what I found was the Russian Big Roma worked really well. I really enjoyed it. You know, one of the reasons that I really liked it was because of its size. You know, right in the name it says that it's a big Roma tomato. And I found that really useful, you know, when you're processing tomatoes, especially when you have to peel the skins off and you have to core them. It's a lot of work to do that for a lot of little tiny tomatoes. When you have fewer tomatoes that are larger, it makes that job a lot easier. So I really enjoyed it for that reason. I will say the one drawback of that tomato, if you're planning to process tomatoes, is that it is an indeterminate variety, which basically means that it does not yield its entire harvest for you all at once. It yielded it gradually over the course of the whole growing season, similar to how most slicing tomatoes do. So that can be a positive or a negative, depending on how you're looking at it. What I ended up using that tomato for was I made a lot of small batch roasted salsa over the course of the summer, which I did not can, I just used fresh. And because I wasn't making a huge batch all at once, because I was making smaller batches over the course of the summer, that tomato worked really well for that purpose. So I probably will grow it again next year. Now I want to mention, even though this is primarily a vegetable video, I do want to mention a couple flower varieties that I tried this year for the first time too. The first is the Rubenza Cosmos. This is a really beautiful, you know, deep pink, really kind of red Cosmos variety, and I grew it for the first time this year. I thought it was really beautiful. Cosmos is one of my favorite flowers to grow in the vegetable garden. I find that it adds a lot of beauty to the garden. It just makes the garden a lot more magical of a place. It attracts pollinators. It's just an all-around winner to grow in the vegetable garden. And I grow a variety of different Cosmos varieties every year. This year I decided to try the Rubenza, and it was really beautiful. I thought that it just went in the garden beautifully. It's different. Cosmos tends to come in more pastel colors, so there are some exceptions. There are some that come in a deep, rich color. But I found that this one was just really beautiful because of that richness of color. It kind of provided a contrast with a lot of the paler colored Cosmos that I often grow. So I really enjoyed that, and I will definitely be adding that into my mix of vegetable garden flowers next year. The other flower that I want to mention that I grew this year for the first time is the Oklahoma salmon zinnia. Similarly to Cosmos, zinnias are one of my go-to flowers for the vegetable garden. They're beautiful, they're easy to grow, they attract pollinators, they make long-lasting, gorgeous cut flowers. They're just, again, an all-around winner. And I have a variety of zinnias that I really enjoy growing in my garden year after year. This year I found that I was kind of drawn to that salmon color in, you know, several different flower varieties, and the Oklahoma salmon zinnia was really beautiful. I did find that when it first started blooming, it was a lot more pink than I expected, not as much salmon. So I was actually almost wondering if I had accidentally purchased the Oklahoma pink instead of the Oklahoma salmon. But as the flowers aged, they turned into a really beautiful, soft coral salmon color, and I really enjoyed them. I thought they did really well, so again, that will be going into my 2025 garden as well. Now the final variety that I want to mention in this video here is the Tango leaf lettuce. I actually first got this lettuce in a grab bag seed haul that I got at the end of 2023, and I planted it in the 2024 garden. One of the main reasons why I was really excited to try this lettuce is because it's supposed to have really impressive cold tolerance. So I planted it very early in the season. I have my Tango lettuce out in the garden still. It's doing really well. It's not the same planting. I planted another planting, but it's done really well. It's done really well through several frosts now, and we still have some nice lettuce out in the garden to harvest. So I have really been enjoying that one, and I will, at the end of the winter, I don't necessarily expect it to go the entire winter, but I'll see how long it makes it through the winter, and I will let you know in the spring, because I'm sure I'll be growing that one again. So I will update you as to how far through the winter that Tango lettuce made it in harvestable condition. So stay tuned for that as a little update in the spring. So this is just a few of my favorite new varieties that I tried this year in the 2024 garden. I'm looking forward to trying lots of new varieties in the 2025 garden. So if you have any recommendations for me, go ahead and let me know, especially anything you tried this year. What was your favorite thing that you tried for the first time this year in your 2024 garden? I would love to hear some recommendations, because it is almost time to start seed shopping and to start planning for the 2025 garden. I'm so excited for that. So I'd love to hear any recommendations that you have. I hope you guys are having a great day, and I can't wait to see you soon. I'll see you next time.